What if the first words from the moon weren't in English, but in Russian? What if the first flag planted on its dusty surface wasn't the stars and stripes, but the hammer and sickle? On July 20th, 1969, the world watched as Neil Armstrong took one giant leap for mankind. But history was almost written very differently. A few more successful tests, a few less catastrophic failures, and we could be living in a world shaped not by an American victory in the space race, but a Soviet one. Let us rewind the clock and explore a timeline where the red flag flies on the lunar landscape. The space race wasn't just about exploration. It was a battle of ideologies, a core theater of the Cold War, for both the United States and the Soviet Union. Reaching the moon first was the ultimate prize, a definitive statement of technological and societal superiority. In our timeline, the US won, but in the early 1960s, the Soviets were consistently ahead. They launched the first satellite, Sputnik. They sent the first animal, Laika, into orbit, and they put the first human, Yuri Gagarin, into space. They were winning, and they had every intention of continuing that streak all the way to the moon. Their plan hinged on a colossal rocket, the N-1. This was the Soviet answer to America's Saturn V, a behemoth designed to propel their cosmonauts to lunar glory. But the N-1 was a troubled giant. It was incredibly complex, with 30 engines in its first stage alone. This complexity, combined with rushed development and internal political rivalries, led to a series of disastrous launch failures. Each of the 4 test launches between 1969 and 1972 ended in a spectacular explosion, effectively crippling the Soviet lunar program. But what if one of them had worked? Let's imagine a scenario where the second N-1 launch on July 3, 1969, just 2 weeks before Apollo 11, is a success. The Soviet mission, a lunar flyby with a zoned spacecraft, goes off without a hitch. This success galvanizes the program. The political infighting subsides, and resources pour into perfecting the N-1. Meanwhile, the American public and politicians are stunned. The Soviets have once again beaten them at a crucial milestone. The pressure on NASA, already immense, becomes unbearable. In this alternate timeline, the Soviets don't wait. Buoyed by their success, they fast-track their crewed lunar landing mission. The cosmonaut selected for this historic task is Alexei Leonov, the first man to walk in space. He's a national hero, the perfect face for Soviet triumph. Instead of early 1972, the N-1 is ready for a crewed lunar mission by late 1970. The world holds its breath. The launch from Baikonur Cosmodrome is flawless. The N-1 rocket performs perfectly, sending Leonov and his crewmate towards the moon. A few days later, Leonov descends in the LK lander, a small, single-person craft. He touches down on the lunar surface. The first words spoken from the moon are broadcast from Moscow. I am at the moon. It is beautiful. For the motherland, the geopolitical shockwave is immense. For the United States, it's a devastating blow, far greater than Sputnik. The Apollo program, once a symbol of national pride, is now seen as a costly failure. Public support plummets. Congressional hearings would demand to know how America, with all its resources, could have lost the ultimate race. The question isn't why go to the moon, But why did we fail? The Cold War dynamic shifts dramatically. The Soviet Union's victory is a monumental propaganda coup. Premier Brezhnev declares it a triumph of the socialist system. Across the globe, nations in the non-aligned movement see the USSR as the rising power, the leader in science and technology. The appeal of communism, which had been waning, cesa resurgense. Soviet influence expands in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. What happens to NASA? The Apollo program is likely cancelled after the Soviet landing. There's no political will to fund a second-place mission. Instead of grand voyages to the moon, NASA's budget is slashed. Its focus shifts to more practical, less inspiring projects, perhaps Earth-orbiting stations or unmanned probes. The age of heroic Apollo-style exploration ends before it truly blossoms in the West. The iconic images of American astronauts on the moon are never created. The moonshot mentality, that sense of boundless American optimism and capability, is severely damaged. Meanwhile, the Soviet space program, flushed with success and prestige, doubles down. They don't just plant a flag and leave. They establish a permanent presence. Following Lenov's landing, they launch a series of missions to build a small lunar base, Zvezda, or star. Using automated rovers and prefabricated modules, they construct a small habitat. The moon becomes a Soviet outpost, a platform for scientific research, military observation, and a symbol of their enduring dominance in space. This would create a new kind of space race. The United States, reeling from the loss, would be forced to respond. But instead of a race to the moon, it becomes a race for control of Earth orbit and beyond. The Pentagon would push for the militarization of space. The fear would be that the Soviet lunar base could be used for military purposes, perhaps as a launch site for weapons or a surveillance post that could watch the entire planet. The U.S. response might be the creation of the Space Force decades earlier, with a focus on anti-satellite weapons and developing its own military space station in Earth orbit. The fragile treaties governing the peaceful use of space would likely collapse. Space would become a new battlefield, an extension of the Cold War's terrestrial tensions. The sky, once a symbol of infinite possibility, would become a frontier of fear and suspicion. Technologically, the world would also look different. With a Soviet-led space effort, the technological spin-offs that benefited the West from the Apollo program might not exist in the same way. Things like microchips, computing, and materials science, which were accelerated by NASA's demands, might develop along a different path, perhaps more slowly or with a focus on different applications. Our digital revolution could have been delayed or taken a different form entirely. Culturally, the impact is just as profound. The sense of global unity that came from watching the Apollo 11 landing, that we came in peace for all mankind moment, is replaced by a moment of stark division. It's not a victory for humanity. It's a victory for one ideology over another. Science fiction, movies, and music would reflect this new reality. Instead of the hopeful visions of Star Trek, we might see more dystopian stories of conflict in space. The Soviet Union itself would be transformed. This monumental achievement would breathe new life into its system. The economic stagnation and social unrest that began to fester in the 1970s and 80s might be off by a wave of national pride and a renewed sense of purpose. the government could point to the moon base as proof that their system worked. Perhaps this success would give the USSR the confidence to enact reforms from a position of strength, or perhaps it would simply embolden its hardliners, delaying its eventual collapse, or even preventing it altogether. A world where the Soviets reach the moon first is a world where the 20th century ends very differently. The Cold War might not have ended in 1991. It could have intensified, extending into the 21st century with a new celestial front. The international cooperation we see today in space, like the International Space Station, would be almost unthinkable. It would be a world of competing space stations, rival moon bases, and a constant, simmering tension in the heavens above. Of course, this is all speculation. The technical hurdles the Soviets faced with the N1 were immense, and it's very possible they never would have overcome them in time. But it's a powerful reminder that history isn't inevitable. It's a story written by successes and failures, by moments of triumph and disaster. A single rocket launch, going one way instead of another, could have truly changed our world. The blue marble of Earth, as seen from the moon, could have been viewed through a very different lens, under a very different flag. What do you think? How would the world be different today if the Soviets had won the race to the moon? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey into an alternate history, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with a friend, and subscribe for more deep dives into the what-ifs of history. Thanks for watching.